How long is this going to take? No, I'm serious. I've been doing this for forever, at least a day or two, and I don't even know how long this is. Welcome to Kettlebell Corner, where strength meets theory, where we take you on a deeper dive into all things kettlebell. And in this episode, we're going to attempt to answer that for you, at least the best we can. We're going to cover 4 areas of adaptation and approximately how long they'll take if you're sending the right signals. All right, Roger, here we are again. Another week, another dollar. We needed your input on this. So how you doing?
I'm good. I see you voted.
Yeah, I did vote.
How did you vote on 75?
And what did I do?
Yeah, on 75.
I'm not 75.
No.
Oh, maybe. I put a maybe on that one.
Okay. That's good. Maybe that's what I put when I vote. Maybe.
That's right. Potentially. I always vote, it depends. I always write in, it depends, because I'm a trainer.
I think that's
first, Roger.
Solid answer.
That's solid. Let's talk about kettlebells, other heavy iron, non-thinking things. Let's talk about adaptation first and put some context into this. So adaptation is basically change, right?
Sure. That works.
Okay, cool. So when we take what we talked about last episode 25 for you at home, and if you don't know that, you should go get that and also subscribe while you're there. We talked about intensity.
I want to change my answer. Adaptation is change to something. It's in response to something. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a response to something. Okay, good. I like that. So in the last episode, we talked about intensity, the something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So now let's talk about that change. So put some context on this and let us know kind of where we're going to jump off at. I'll tell you the first thing we're going to start with is going to be motor learning and neurological gains. That's that brain stuff, Roger. So do we need to frame this up in any sort of way like you like to do?
I do think so. I want this stuff to come across as clear. We're going to give some numbers, some averages, some things that you can use that are helpful as a jump off point to your own training, for your own training. But I think if we don't understand what it is we're trying to do and how it actually works in a broad sense, I think we're going to have a hard time applying this narrowly. And specifically, I think that we have a hard time applying it narrowly when we want to be too specific. And I don't think we need to be that specific. So if we go back to this idea of adaptation, it's the idea that you want to change how your body looks, feels, or works. So you're trying to cause a specific change that is in line with something that you want. In order to do that, you need to provide stimulus, which was, as you pointed out, one of the things we talked about last time was giving an appropriate stimulus in narrow terms. There are other things that you can use as a stimulus, but we talked about the idea of weight or intensity and how that sometimes works with volume. We didn't really talk a lot about volume, so we probably owe the good people an episode on that at some point. But I want people to get a broader sense that what we're doing is providing the stimulus piece in order to get changes that we want. The stimulus that we expose the body to will determine the type of adaptation we get. If you do bicep curls, I don't think that you have any reason to believe that your chest is going to get bigger. It just doesn't really track. So we to some degree needs to be specific, but the stimulus piece needs to give your body the signal that it needs to change in a specific way. And that's where this leads into the next piece of this. But what I want people to take away from this is that what you need to do is give the right stimulus. And there are lots of ways to do that. When you get into rep schemes, when you get into weight, there are easily 10 different ways to do this the right way. There is no one way. There is no magic number. There's no, hey, I have to follow this. So what we're offering you are some jump off points, and then you track what it is you want. Okay. If you don't know what it is you want, then don't worry about any of this stuff. This stuff doesn't matter. If you're just lifting kettlebells because you like lifting kettlebells, you should probably pay attention to some of this stuff because there is a safety consideration with how long certain adaptations take. But this is going to be for people who want a specific adaptation. And that is a question, people come into the gym, I've got a client who's scheduled 3 days a week and they show up once a week. So, is that enough? Is that enough to make changes? No. I convinced my client, hey, show up all 3 days. Happens for 2 weeks. I don't feel like I'm making any changes. I was like, well, you did make a big change. You've been showing up, but that's not really long enough to make things happen. So that leads into the question, how long is enough? So
we're not going to name names, but if you're listening to this, show up. All right. How long is enough? I don't know. I think we'll cover that, but I definitely know things do take time and it does require patience. And first things first, if you're new to kettlebells or you're refining a technique, that's going to require some significant input. And that's going to kind of take us into this motor learning or this neurological thing, which I think is something that can get overlooked, possibly with the load stuff, which we talked about in the previous episode. But as far as the time frame for it, we got 0 to 3+ weeks for that, and 3+ could mean 12 years. Because if you're trying to change small things over time, you're going to always have something to change.
Sure,
is that right?
I think it is.
So if I start something new, let's just take it if it's a new person, how am I going to experience this quicker? And if I've been doing this, like somebody like myself who's been using kettlebells for quite a long time, how come that seems to take longer?
This does get tricky, and I wish I had a better answer to this question. Some people have more awareness of their bodies. Either way, when you start off, let's back up. When you start off with learning a new activity, your gains are going to be most pronounced in the first couple of weeks. That you can see a several 100% improvement in loads you can manage in a single session, and a lot of that just comes down to learning. Now, how long it takes for someone to get better at that motor learning piece, I really don't know. That's going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on mindset. It's going to depend on, your training history. If, for example, I have someone who has been an athlete, let's say in high school or college, generally they will adapt better and faster because they have more body awareness. They're often more coachable. Oddly, the higher level athlete I've had, the harder it is for them to make changes in most of my experience because they have they have expectations. And sometimes you've got to break those expectations down before you can make progress. But assuming somebody has some decent body awareness, you can get changes right away. And those changes are going to come fast. You're going to notice a really big difference. And then those differences are going to trail off. You're not going to just get these small neurological changes. You might get a new technique. We've discussed recently your press and standing with your feet a little bit wider. I would argue that we didn't really make a huge change to your technique. I think we just broadened your stance a little bit, which naturally gave you a little bit better balance, and you had more resources that you already knew how to use. But when you start somebody out right away, you're going to get some significant changes. And why we're leading off with this is don't underestimate the value of technique, because you can make substantial gains right away. Focusing on technique is really just teaching you how to move load more appropriately. How can you organize your body in a way to push a kettlebell against gravity? And when you do that, ideally, you make substantial changes. Your brain starts to wire up and it starts to learn how to do a task. So that first, this really happens throughout the first couple months, but you can, even within a single session, one set to the next, you'll see substantial changes to people new to this. So it's a really good idea to focus on technique first before anything else and not worry about other things like, hypertrophy or some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about, because your strength is going to improve. as you are gaining capacity to move a kettlebell better. And then once you're out of that phase where you're getting kind of all these neuromuscular gains where your brain is just figuring out how to move better, you will start to get some tissue response. But it's really once you get out of that first phase where you can really start focusing on hypertrophy and proper percentages and rep ranges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I really like to let people just get better at moving. And then I will have another focus that also, though, depends on their goal.
Yeah. So the idea that taking the time in the beginning or whenever you're trying to learn something new and allowing that to become more or less second nature allows you to then further on down the line really load things up or really hit specific things that you're trying to get to, because you're not spending as many resources trying to figure out how to hold this thing or where to stand or how much leg drive is or where my arc is and all these sort of intangibles that come into with kettlebell training specifically, because it's not, I've argued that anybody can go do dumbbells. Okay. Anybody can just grab a dumbbell. It's pretty balanced. If you can lift it up, you can probably figure out a way to eventually do it. Although there are nuances, I won't disparage them too much, but the odd positioning of the kettlebell requires a certain amount of brain power or body awareness that you have to learn. And I think that's a great thing. Now you said
Sure.
mindset. What are we talking about when you say mindset? What are you talking about with that?
Really how open people are to learning. It's not uncommon for people, I've been training and coaching for a long time, and depending upon where people are, sometimes I get my favorite people to work with generally are people who are really serious about getting better at kettlebells. It's often coaches, but sometimes it's people who really just want to get good at kettlebells for the sake of getting good at kettlebells. And they're very open-minded. They will share what they know or what they've learned or what they think. But these people come in with the attitude of exploration. Let's see what happens. And rather than pushing back against me, say, hey, let's try your stance here, your stance there. And they usually have great results right away. There are other people who, for whatever reason, I've encountered this a lot in, 20 plus years. People come in and they tell me how to do my job. They tell me what they need. And, it really is kind of a silly thing. Like if you can do my job, why are you paying me to do it? But nevertheless,
they like to spend money.
Nevertheless, they come in and they explain what it is they need, not what they want. That's valid, but they explain what they need. And it takes a little while from me just smiling and being quiet and, until I can say, hey, you don't know anything. Do what I tell you and you'll make changes. Yeah. And that happens, depending upon the person, slower or faster, but mindset is huge. If you're open to experiencing things, and if you're open to being a beginner, if you're open to failing and, you're not getting really upset about it, then people tend to figure things out faster. And that first motor learning piece is very rewarding and they get a lot out of it. So, once you come in with the right attitude, the right mindset, let's say you figure out your squat, then it's going to take some time to pattern that squat in. One rep doesn't mean you have it down. It usually will take, a couple weeks of doing that. And that's when we can start layering in repetition. Usually we go at this point, lighter intensities, and we want to give people a reasonable volume. We don't want to go so much where you're going to be stressing the tissue because the tissue hasn't built up capacity, but we also want to give you more times to succeed. So, generally we'll focus a little bit more on lower weight, reasonable volume. But, I've seen a few times, even coaches who I'm working with, a press is a very common reason for me to be working with someone. So they want to get that press up and suddenly they're able to bell up twice because we worked on their technique, and they're going nuts with this new bell, and they hurt themselves because they don't have the tissue tolerance and they didn't listen to the last episode. They wanted, to continue to continue to max out every time. So this neurological piece, this motor learning piece is huge. You want to approach it with a little bit of curiosity. Leave your frustration behind. Don't shake your head. Nobody and nothing owes you anything. If you have expectations of succeeding in any realm of your life, you're wasting your time. Earn that right. and focus on what you're doing, get better, and then repeat.
Yeah. And then get better again. Just keep
That's the way it
leveling it up.
works. So once we get that neuromuscular piece, and again, we can focus on this for, really 1 to 3 weeks. Although I do see like the first few months of people training, they continue to get better at a faster rate, but that's because they're untrained. Physiologically, their bodies haven't been exposed to a lot. So you're adapting on a bunch of different levels. Once you get past that phase, though, is then we can really start looking at other things. We can kind of branch. Are you interested in cardio adaptations? Are you interested in hypertrophy, muscle adaptations? Where do you want to go next?
Yeah, well, let's go to cardio next, because a lot of times when you're learning something new, not only are you trying to control this thing inside your brain and your body and make them connect and practice with intention as it all should, but you're often huffing and puffing, and cardio takes a long time. This mythical zone 2 or these other higher heart rate zones that everybody's talking about, they're all the buzz, they're all the things in the world, and that's going to take time, probably about 3 to 6 weeks on an average, or a broad stroke, would you say? What are your thoughts on what's the asterisk? If you're on steroids, or are you wearing one of those training masks, those altitude training masks that were in vogue?
The asterisk is, you again need to go through the first phase. You need to build some technical competency. One thing I've discovered a few times is people who are athletic already, they want to get into kettlebells. Let's say they're cyclists or they're marathoners, and they've got this great cardiovascular capacity. And we get into swinging and they are just beat. Even squats, they don't do much or anything in the weight room, and they come in 3 sets of 10, like, oh my God, like I'm so gassed. I can run 10 miles, but I'm having a hard time doing these squats. It's not the same for anybody who's ever been in this. It's not the same sort of cardio, if you will. People lump it under cardio, and there is a capacity, or there's an aspect where, your blood circulation is not ideal. But what I see more often for people new to kettlebells is and what this asterisk actually is you need to get your body accommodated to shoving blood down into your legs at a different rate, at a different intensity, and then back up to your heart. And if you look at, the capillaries, these actually spread throughout the tissue and the muscles. So you will see people, you'll see people, let's call it, get veinier, and you'll have the ability to really shove this blood.
Everybody likes that.
You'll have the ability to shove this blood down into your legs and then back up to your heart. I've had people who, again, really high level runners, who after, the first session, they want to push themselves too hard, and they end up, kind of going into a cold sweat. No, I think I'm going to throw up. And same thing. I usually lie them on their backs. I lift their legs up, and I explain to them something called blood pooling, and like, hey, your blood does not know how to get from your legs to your heart and back at this intensity with this activity, right? So I don't think it's reasonable to expect people to be able to train true cardiovascular intensities. And there's a big question whether or not you can do this the same way with kettlebells. I argue you can in some capacity, in some way, whether it's a true zone 2 or zone 4 or 5, whatever it is, I don't care. But you can do this, but you have no business expecting that you can do this until you get some baseline conditioning in your legs. Would you say
getting
that's
the
fair?
reps in? Yeah, because it's 100% fair, and this is something that changes as some running or cycling and these sort of things. These are real cyclical, or this is a repeated motion. It's, you get used to it. There's not a lot of load on you, only the load that you carry with your body most of the time. And then you now take, and let's just take that squat. Perhaps you're somebody who can, it's a goblet squat, or maybe you're doing your double front rack squats for the first time, and or whenever it is, and you're starting now to feel this weight on your chest, and now this requires so much more effort to get these things happening. I think inevitably when I train some people and we start to get into the snatches, or we're doing swings, particularly in an EMOM fashion, or maybe we're going for 10 minutes or even a little bit longer, they're really gassing, even though I play all kinds of sports. I do these long walks and stuff like that. Well, it's a different intensity. And you explained it with just the amount of blood that's got to travel back and forth and figured out. Plus you're moving up and down a lot usually, which
changing levels is a game changer for sure. And, this really goes back to, again, the last topic we treated, this idea of intensity. You need to treat each set as an all-out effort. And, what we were talking about last episode applies here. If you go and suddenly you're able to do, 10 reps, 10 swings with a particular bell, don't just expect like, oh, that's just what I do now. You might be able to do that, but don't think that I can go and I can start doing EMOMs and things like that. And, I've got this heavy bell. Why can't I do an EMOM with this? Well, because you just really earned the right to swing this thing, and it's going to take some time. So you want to think, when you are training your cardiovascular system, you don't need to go to 100% of your intensity. And most of the time, if you're working to just get up some basic capacity, I mean, you're usually looking at more moderate. You want to get your heart rate up for a period. Like what are the recommendations? You're more of the cardio guy. What do you usually tell people?
I tell them, if you're really huffing and puffing, it's probably a little bit too intense to what you want to do. If you're able to do these things, and once we're done, you can kind of carry this conversation on a little bit with us, then you're probably in the right spot. If you can finish the set and maybe close your mouth and breathe through your nose for a period of time, or if you can do that, then you're probably in the right space for that. But if you're finishing the set and you're like doubled over and you gotta hold your knees and you're really struggling, then it was an intensity. So there was probably a little bit more intense than you need to go. And you have to be patient to get to the point where you can say, okay, I can do 10 swings. I can now walk around for a minute rest with my mouth shut, breathing through my nose. Now, is this something you have to do? You don't have to. You can breathe through your mouth. I don't care how you get it. But if you're trying to gauge a level, because I can't sit here and say like, hey, how did that feel for you every time? Because people's RPEs are all over the place. And then on top of it, immediately following something cardiovascular, you might think it's a lot harder than it needs to be. Well, let's prove it. Let's see where you're at. And I think this is a good physical indicator to kind of see like, okay, this is good. In fact, I did it just today, working on some jerks. And then I finished. And I'm like, okay, let me just walk around for a minute and breathe through my nose. And this is something that I think is valuable. I remember going through, maybe it was a level 2 certification the first time I attempted it in Seattle, and we were doing one of those crazy like 2-1-3 complexes or something like that. And it was, you do the press, the clean, the press, the squat, and then you immediately go to the swings as your next set, and then you get your rest. And in this, the leaders of the cert were, you should be closing your mouth and breathing through your nose at this point. And I was in it, and that was not possible for me. I'm like a fish out of water here. Like, I'm like, okay, I could do this. And I thought I had pretty good cardiovascular fitness. I could pass the snatch test. And I was like, okay, that's good. But it's different. And that was too much. So don't do that. You're thinking 3 sessions a week, 20 to 30 minutes, moderate intensity, maybe a month and a half. You can be at a place where you have pretty decent cardiovascular, maybe feel a little bit less stressed in some of the higher rep sets of swings or snatches or something like that. I think a big indicator of your cardiovascular fitness, and this is something that I notice having trained a lot with running and also kettlebells, is how fast I'm able to recover in between sets, where it's something like, oh, I feel pretty good. Now, do I take the full prescribed rest? Usually, because I understand these things add up. But knowing that I'm, maybe I come off of that set and I'm breathing through my mouth and it takes me 15 seconds to get down to that nasal breathing. And I'm like, okay, cool. All right. That wasn't too bad. These are sort of ways to monitor that.
Okay. And so moderate a couple times a week.
Consistency is key.
Sure.
Yeah. The consistency is key. So don't neglect it. And I think that's where the problem arises. Everybody's all for the strength aspect of kettlebells, which is rightfully so. It's a very important thing. You build muscle, you build strength. But do tap into that input of building that cardiovascular fitness, because it helps you in all those other aspects as well.
One thing I'm noticing, I'm prepping for the snatch test right now, and it's something that doesn't come easily for me. It's not something that I do naturally or well. But I have noticed in this prep cycle, I've been focusing on moving lighter bells. I've been focusing on, not on strength, which I had done in the past, but I've been focusing on moving even 16, 20, but using work to rest ratios and just letting my heart do what my heart does. And I'm finding that going into my practice, I'm able to get it in more throughout the week. So whereas in the past, maybe I would really go hard and I'd maybe do 2, maybe 3 snatch sessions. Now I can get 4 in easy. I'm noticing that everything is starting to move easier. My strength isn't dropping. I am going through and I'm doing, some singles and doubles with, a heavier bell, 32 snatches, etc. And I'm doing all my regular strength stuff. And what I'm finding is by using lighter bells and not redlining, not really getting all the way up to the top, just kind of working that 80% rule and just doing 80% of what I need to do, I'm finding myself adapting quickly. I'm practicing more frequently. I'm enjoying it. I'm not tearing up my hands. I don't feel beat up. So, just doing just enough, I'm finding I'm really adapting quickly. But the caveat here is I already have the technique down and I already have a sufficient baseline of strength, which is really, really important. So that's what I was going to say. The basic pieces you need to pass this test, you've got your strength, you've got your cardio, and you've got your muscle endurance. And for me, the limiting factor has always been the cardiovascular capacity. That's the hardest part. And then next, my muscular endurance, because I don't like lifting a lot. I like lifting heavy. And then the strength has always been an automatic check. So I've reprioritized and said, well, wait a second. I don't need to even work with my snatch test size bell. Let me just focus on the cardio piece with this 16 or 20 kilo bell. Let me get that up. In the meantime, I'm already building a baseline of of muscular endurance. And by the time I start mixing the 24s in, I'm gonna have that built very quickly. But I'm already building that cardio base, and that's been very, very helpful. So just not respecting the stop signs, not going super hard, and maintaining control of my session. I'm able to do more sessions, and I really feel a lot more positive about this prep, as opposed to dreading it and hating it. Like, oh, I'm never going to do this test. This is awful.
Well, and that's something, having known you for so long and gone through these snatch test preparations several times, that's the biggest thing. I think that's a mindset thing as well when it comes to the cardiovascular fitness. Knowing now, as you build up gradually and you've taken and identified the biggest limiting factor, which is that cardiovascular fitness, because you have the strength. When you get to 24, the 24 is light to you no matter what you do. But to snatch it over 100 reps, it's going to be heavy. But because you've created that cardio base and you've eliminated that doubt in your mind, and I think that is very important when it comes to snatch tests, and maybe that's another episode as well. But when you eliminate that doubt in your mind and of that limiting factor, then the rest sort of kind of falls in the line. The reason I started running years back was because I didn't feel like I was conditioned enough to do these snatch tests in an effective way without, finishing and then trying to pull my heart through the floor after it fell out of my body. And
sure.
So I started running, and now I know, like, oh, okay, I'm conditioned for this. And then for me, it's more just a muscular endurance, just snatching it that weight that amount of time. I can handle the weight. It's just like getting that into it. And that comes with muscle growth, Roger. Muscle growth. So you've handled your cardio. So give yourself a month and a half. Take your time, be patient. But we want to grow that muscle. That's why we're doing kettlebells. I see you in that tank top right there. You're showing that muscle growth. How long does that take? Hypertrophy, Roger. This is your specialty, I can tell. So tell me how long we got to do this hypertrophy? 8, 9, 10, 12, 40 weeks? What are we talking?
One, it's really not. It's not something I train for. It's not something I've really focused on.
It's just a byproduct?
Yeah, I'm focused on it since I was in my 20s. I did get some extra size working with double bells. I got some incidental size working with strength, and also a little bit more barbell training lately. So that does help. But getting back to, this idea of how long does this take, and here we're assuming technical proficiency, so we want to make sure that we're doing things the right way. You're not going to start to see changes in muscle size for at a really, really low 4 weeks. You'll start to see, people who really adapt quickly. But for many people, you're looking at 6 to 12 weeks in many cases. And a lot of people will be more in like the 6 to 8, 6 to 10. But it does take some time to grow muscle tissue. It doesn't just happen right away. It takes a lot of volume. And some people do grow more than other people. I do happen to grow muscle fairly easily, and I have for a long time now. When I was in my 20s, I did a lot of lifting and I did focus more on bodybuilding. I was never in any way interested in competing, but I did train that way. So, perhaps
I think
my brain
everybody did in their 20s.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common. So, I maybe that's a factor, but again, it really just comes down to sending the right signal for enough time. So you may find right away, even after a couple workouts, like, oh, you're looking down like, oh, hey, my arms are starting to feel a little tighter, and your brain might start to hold your muscles at a different resting length. But don't mistake that for muscular hypertrophy or growth of the muscle fiber, because it can take a while, and it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen very quickly where you grow tons and tons of muscle. It just doesn't. A lot of what people will see as an appreciable size increase will be increased glycogen storage. That will happen. Your body will start to store more glucose at the muscular level because you're going to need it. So your muscles will look a little fuller. So, this is one of those things where, you're thinking slow and steady, and you need to expose yourself to, adequate stimulus. In the beginning, you at least want to train a muscle probably 2-3 times a week. You can get away with a little bit less. You will hear bodybuilders, who do something once a week, and that's great for them because they're super advanced and they hit it really, really hard. But if you're a novice, you don't have the ability to hit something really hard. You don't have the ability to go 10 out of 10 intensity. You might think you do, but you don't. If you're new to training, yeah, you haven't figured it out yet. So better to give yourself repeated bouts of exposure. So if there's a body part that you want to grow a little muscle in, then you're going to need to give yourself 2-3 sessions per week to focus on those muscles. And you're going to need to spend probably 4 to 8 weeks in order to start to see some size differences. And you're going to need to do sufficient volume. That's not the subject of this. And you'll need to do sufficient intensity. Also, not really what we're focusing on now. But I will say,
yeah, we did a whole episode on that.
If you do your normal kettlebell lifts with enough volume to tax you, you should see some muscle growth. And also keep in mind, hypertrophy is not what kettlebells are really known for. And if that is your number one goal, I'm glad you joined us and I'm glad you're listening. But you're going to want to mix in. You want to mix in some other versions of training. You absolutely can get muscular, using kettlebells. There's no question, but you're going to want to get up to double bells pretty quickly, and make sure you hit that technical
some other
capacity
isolation
piece
stuff.
first.
Right?
Yeah, sure. But that's generally how long that's going to take.
Yeah, and that's sort of kind of why there's this cool thing with kettlebells is that you can get muscles with kettlebells. And yeah, the load is what is required, but the reps are required. And it just depends how you train it. But if you're training with kettlebells, a lot of the benefit is the fact that you can show up multiple days in a row. In fact, you could probably show up 7 days in a row, no joke, depending if you vary the intensity, wave the loads, this sort of thing, or whatever the case may be, and you can gain muscle. I have a decent amount of muscle mass, and prior to maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I was really only doing kettlebells, some barbell stuff here and there, but it wasn't anything sufficient to be like, yeah, this is also contributing to how much muscle I have and how big my muscles are. And they're pretty big, Roger. And I'll do a measurement and I'll send it to you. But
yeah, please do.
It's impressive. It's impressive. So when it comes to hypertrophy and where the kettlebells differ, and we've covered this many times, but I'm just going to give it a Cliff's Note version. Most people don't know what Cliff's Notes are anymore. They just use ChatGPT, but it's basically you want to hit 70-80% of your 1 rep max, aim for sets from 8 to 12, maybe even a little bit more, just depends who you are and how you are. And like Roger said, a couple times a week. What is that going to be? That could just be, more pressing. Maybe you're pressing more and getting in a little deeper in your press, blah, blah, blah. That's not the point of this one, but it will take time. And also, I wanted to mention this. I thought about this when you were talking about muscle size. How you feed your body is going to be a big contributing factor into that as well.
For sure.
We're both certified nutrition coaches, but we'll tell you, if you're eating like a bird and want to get bigger muscles, it's probably not going to happen.
Probably not going to happen.
You might be skinny and see muscle definition, but that's not going to be big.
I also want to be clear with these recommendations, especially when it comes to hypertrophy. These are kind of middle of the road averages that will work for a lot of people. These are not hyper specialized. It doesn't mean that if you do 2 reps of something, you can't gain muscle size, because you absolutely can. It's not going to be the ideal range. Usually the volume tends to be a little higher, or when the volume gets higher, you're more likely to grow muscle mass. So if you look at, let's say, the difference between a power lifter, an Olympic lifter, and a bodybuilder, one of the main differences is both the loads they lift, but also the volume they do. So as you do more volume, most bodybuilders do a ton of volume, especially over time, because that's what makes muscles grow. Again, I just don't want people to get stuck on this is the way, or this is the only way. We're throwing out middle of the road averages that are going to work for most people most of the time. If they don't work for you, you adjust. If you find that I can gain muscle by doing sets of 5, and I don't need to go above 5 much, so why would I? But there are other people who are not going to grow if they do 8s, so they may need to go 12 plus. It's going to be highly dependent upon the move. Are you doing, a very complex multi-joint movement? Are you doing a small isolation movement? Generally, most people can do multi-joint movements for lower reps and see results. Whereas when you get into the high rep, when you get into the isolation stuff, it tends to be a little higher rep. So again, these are just averages. This is stuff that you can use to set a benchmark, and then see how you do from there, and then adjust up or down as necessary.
Yeah, and again, this is letting the time train you. We were talking about how long this usually takes, and we're saying 8 to 12 weeks in general. And one cool thing before we move to the next thing is, if you want big legs and that big hiney, well, kettlebells is the right place. Put it on tape. All right, Roger. you're gonna get that badonk if you train, because every movement is basically a leg movement. So there's no shortage of reps there. All right, Roger, this is probably, we saved the best for last. Well, the longest for last, I'll say, but probably the most important. Our tendons and ligaments. Okay, these are the gristly part of that chicken leg that you eat. You got that little chewy piece. You got those in your body too. So these things take a long time, and I'll share more personally about this. But you say about 3 to 6 months, give or take, right in there. What are we talking about? What does it look like when we notice that this adaptation is happening? I think I'd be curious about what your take is on that.
How do we know? I don't know that we notice when it does happen. I know that we notice when it doesn't, though. And usually this is you aches and pains, little flare ups, things like that. One thing that we talk about a good bit is time for tissues to adapt. And these are the tissues that we're mainly talking about. They don't have a great blood supply and it takes a long time. So let's say you're new on your kettlebell journey and you're doing, let's say, some swings, and you're learning, you get one swing down. Woohoo. I'm super excited. This is great. You start stringing together sets of 5. Oh, these are awesome. And then you look at someone on YouTube or Instagram and, they're doing 200 swings a session. Well, that's what they do. Let me go ahead and do that. The odds of you hurting yourself are high. It's going to depend on how you are when you come into this. But even if you have, let's say, a sufficient training background, the rate at which your muscles are changing, that you're changing levels, it's completely different from, let's say, doing regular barbell dumbbell training to doing kettlebell swings. So the tissue is really got to have different elastic properties. It's got to change length at a different speed. So you're going to need to give yourself some time in order to not get injured. And because of that, this is one of the most important things for people to take away is when you bell up or when you go from, just beginner technical proficiency, especially with ballistics, people tend to not overdo it as much with the grind lifts because they often can't. When you go right from, hey, I can swing now to I'm swinging 100, 200 times, be very cautious with that. Just because you need to take some time in order to build that soft tissue, the connective tissue. And specifically, you need to be able to build that tissue to swing. So don't go do any crazy volume jumps for a couple months. You can still you can still train your kettlebells. You can put a bunch of things together. You can still get tired. You can do complexes and grinds and your swings, but don't go nuts.
Yeah. Take it easy. Take it easy. One of the particular places for this connective tissue that often crops up in kettlebell training is going to be the elbows. And that could be from the cleans, it's from the swings, it's from it's not the swings, the snatches, and oftentimes those lockouts on those presses and these sort of things. And where I see this happen most is when, one, you jump up the rep scheme too soon. You didn't give yourself enough time. You didn't take the appropriate steps, your 1-5-1 path or anything like that. And two, you add way too much weight. And 3, your technical proficiency isn't ready for it yet. Maybe you're moving through the wrong part of your body, these sort of things. So you see all this comes together. So if this is something that you're noticing, these aches and pains, it's probably one of the things we've already talked about that you tried to rush through or didn't give enough time or allow yourself to do that. Perfect example is that snatch test, Roger. It's if you haven't done a snatch test and you're training for a snatch test, but you can snatch at 24 if that's your weight, it would behoove you to do those lighter weights for a little bit of time. Not only is Roger developing his cardiovascular fitness doing that, but he's also getting those tendons and ligaments, those grizzly chicken pieces, really conditioned to handle 5 minutes of snatch blasting. Can I say that?
Say it as much as you want. We're going to put that on a t-shirt. Snatch blasting.
Snatch blasting. Okay.
Look for that in the Iron Revival store.
Yeah. Sign up for the newsletter. It'll be exclusive.
One thing I do want to point out, and I want to ask you your experience with this, but since you've increased your technical proficiency, we've had a really good framework. We understand how to execute these movements. How often do you get sore elbows anymore?
Hardly never. And
yeah.
Typically, the only time I really get the sore elbows now is if I'm adding shitty pull-ups to the mix. That's really the only place.
That's fair.
And so that reminds me to be better at pull-ups. But as far as with my technical skills, like cleans, snatches, these sort of things, I don't get sore elbows too often. And if somebody I train gets sore elbows, I automatically know it's probably coming from a little bit of misalignment where they're rotating from and stuff like that. Or not enough legs, honestly.
I remember going through prep for our first certification together, and the thing that got in my way more than anything was that elbow pain. It wasn't the strength. It wasn't the endurance to keep going, whether it was muscular or cardiovascular. It was just my elbows hurt so much because my arms were doing too much. I didn't really understand how to use my legs. I didn't get it. I didn't have the technical proficiency. I didn't learn how to pull, let's say when I was cleaning, I didn't learn how to pull the bell once my legs had already gotten it moving. Same with the snatch. So that's a big piece that does save you a lot of work. Don't be like us and go back and have to figure it out after you already go through the pain. If you look at just how much, let's say we are looking specifically at the elbow and the soft tissue adaptation there, the connective tissue adaptation. If you're using your legs to really, really power these skills, you're using maybe a quarter of the, you're putting maybe a quarter of the strain on this connective tissue that you would if you're just pulling it up with your arm, which means you're going to be able to get more reps in. You'll expose these tissues to less strain and you'll have a lot more activity while you're waiting to adapt. If you're coming in and you're trying to take it easy and you're arm pulling your clean or your arm pulling your snatch, then your connective tissue is going to be grouchy and you're not going to be able to do as much while you're waiting for these adaptations to occur. So we really do recommend you build this technical proficiency piece. You rely on the connective tissue less. You give yourself more training while that adaptation is happening. And then once you really get it all down, your tissues understand, how to behave. You've built them up over time. Then you can really start going into greater endurance. And now you have a frame of reference. And now you understand, hey, I feel like, okay, I'm kind of getting into a point where I'm feeling a little overworked. Let me back off. Let me taper the volume, for a little bit and then build back up.
Yeah, patience with this stuff is really key, and allowing all of these things to kind of work together. The main thing that is standing out to me, Roger, is that technical proficiency, which is what's going to happen early on, and we talked about it first, is going to allow you to develop the cardiovascular fitness appropriately and any muscle growth appropriately. But more importantly, it's going to allow those tendons and ligaments to adapt in a, I guess maybe like a steady sort of manner to where they're not getting tweaked out and grouchy and go to pick up your water bottle and it hurts because your elbow is jacked up,
Sure.
And that's real things that happen to people. It's real. I've talked to people who've done it. I've, come in and coached people at kettlebells who've done it, kettlebells with other people, and they're like, I can't even get up past this and this sort of stuff. So these are important things, and really it's just taking your time. And then I know this for a fact from running, where there was a very bad connective tissue injury I had where I couldn't even really walk because my Achilles tendon is very pissed from too much load, too fast, not enough technical proficiency, all these things that we just told you to kind of pay mind to. We want you to understand that it takes time. Like I learned the hard way. Roger learned the hard way. So you don't have to learn the hard way. Just listen to this and take your time and do it right. And the time it takes is, just to recap what it is you got motor learning and neurological gains that could be almost immediate because you're doing something new typically, or you're very focused and intentional on something, but it could be locked in about 3 to 6 weeks, give or take. But it's it's something that will develop over time, or continually as well. Your cardio improvement noticeably improved with the right input, and the consistency is going to be about 4 to 6 weeks. Your muscle growth, visible muscle growth, again, preface it with the right inputs, it could take around 8 to 12 weeks, and the tendon and ligaments requires 12 to 24 weeks or longer of consistent work, and also the right input. So don't go, this isn't a boot camp. Kettlebells, often get tossed into boot camp things like F45s and stuff like that. But these aren't boot camp, but this is like a nice way to enjoy training, to learn technical skills, to be mindful of what you're doing. And just to Roger's point, way back at the beginning, that mindset thing is critical. How many times do we see it, Roger? Somebody does a bad rep, shakes their head, and then continues to do bad reps. Well, it's because you're telling yourself it's bad reps. So these all go together. But that's, generally speaking, some of the time frames that we identified as valuable and important.
Yeah,
agree?
And
disagree? Anything else?
I do with the bees. I do agree with these times. These are all happening at the same time. It's not one, then the next, then the next, then the next. It's not, you're not just getting one adaptation. It doesn't mean, if you're focusing on muscle growth, it doesn't mean you're not going to get cardio. It doesn't mean that your connective tissues aren't adapting as well. So just be cautious, give yourself the required time, and just remember that upper level. If you're new to kettlebells and you haven't given yourself 3 months, and you're really starting to jack up the volume, even if you are a trained individual, if let's say you're a high level athlete who's used to doing things like plyometrics, and you're used to doing, you're strong and your tissues are ready, you can do this a little faster because you've already gotten this adaptation from your other training. But if you're new to kettlebells, specifically the ballistics, and you've never done anything like that, then give yourself a solid 3 months of training before you really increase the volume. And then, if you need longer, you need longer. It's rare that I see someone who has a really, really solid swing first 3 months anyway. They can be good, and you can teach somebody how to swing in a single session. I've seen it. I've done it. But to really, really have it dialed in, it's going to take years, but you can see some solid stuff in 3 months. And at that point, then, okay, start bumping up your volume then, but don't say, hey, I got my first swing in my first session. Now I'm doing 100 swings every workout. I'm going to do simple and sinister, doing 100 swings a day, 6 days a week. And it's like, oh, you hurt yourself.
Yeah. Even in simple and sinister, they don't even say do that. Yeah. And don't let the internet influence you so much, unless it's us.
Unless it's us.
And remember, comparing yourself to others and where they're at in their kettlebell stuff, it's only going to rob you of the experience that you're going to get from developing your own self. How about that, Roger? Put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah,
that's too sentimental.
I'll put that on the back of the Snatch Blaster.
Snatch Blaster. Take your time and do it right. Okay. All right. I think that's it for today. Roger, thank you for laying out these time frames for us. And if you haven't checked out the book, go ahead and get that book, Kettlebell Essentials. Wait, Kettlebell Essentials Ballistics. You got it right there, Roger?
Maybe.
Of course not. All right. Put it in the air like you just don't care. Anyways, it's on Amazon. The links are in the descriptions for these sort of things. There it is. Yes. Get this book, understand some of these concepts, and then really take this time frame and cut it in half. I'm just kidding. We don't advocate for that, but you might. All right. Anything else, Roger?
Nope.
All right. Download the Bells app. It's free on the Apple App Store, and there's a timer in there and a workout history so you can see how long you've been doing this.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Adapted.
That is a useful piece of tech.
We got it covered.
We do.
It's basically a gym in your pocket. Okay. Takes care of your notes, takes care of your training, takes care of your rest breaks. Plus, you get to see our faces. Okay. All right. That's it. Stay strong, everybody.
Bye, everybody.